The real estate landscape and how business is transacted here in the US may change forever after the bombshell verdict came down against National Association of Realtors, NAR, and major brokers. On October 31st, a US jury in Missouri found National Association of Realtors and brokers Keller Williams and Home Services of America guilty in the antitrust lawsuit Sitzer Burnett versus NAR. The jury found the defendants liable to the tune of $1.78 billion, which could treble up to $5 billion, for conspiring to artificially inflate commissions on home sales by enforcing the cooperative compensation rule, also known as the participation rule. While it looks like we're not going to get the final judgment on this verdict until April or May of 2024, this is just one of a number of similar lawsuits, with more seeming to spring up every day. Before we get to the heart of the issues surrounding these lawsuits, let's step back and take a look at how real estate transactions typically work here in the US. Now, NAR contends the current commission structure has been in place for over 100 years and actually benefits the consumer. So how does this current structure work? Well, if you're a homeowner and you're looking to sell your property, typically you're going to hire a listing agent to sell the home for you. When you hire that agent, you agree to a certain commission amount, and typically here in the US, that's been between 5 and 6% for them to successfully sell your property. Now, that listing agent in turn turns around and offers a percentage of that commission back to the buy-side agent, the agent that successfully brings a buyer that purchases the property. Now, that percentage has typically been about half. So let's say on a 6% commission, about 3% would go to the buy-side agent. The actual percentage that is offered to the buy-side agent is broadcasted through the MLS, the multiple listing service, when the property is put out to market. And thus, the buy-side agents know ahead of time exactly how much they would make on a particular property if they bring a successful buyer. This actually leads to part of the plaintiff's argument as far as steering, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But as I mentioned, NAR, on the other hand, said it's been like this for 100 years, and it works for both the buyer and the seller, which obviously the jury didn't agree with NAR on this point. Let's get back to that. Aside from Sitzer Burnett, we now have a number of other high-profile cases, and the next in line is Merle versus NAR. This case, originally filed back similar time frame as Sitzer Burnett, is a much larger trial because it encompasses a larger area and is coming out of Illinois. But in this case, the plaintiffs allege that NAR and four of the largest brokers anywhere, Home Services of America, Keller Williams, and RE/MAX, violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by artificially inflating commissions on home sellers through the cooperation of commissions between the listing agents and the buyer's agent. As mentioned, the Merle trial is much bigger than Sitzer Burnett, and if found liable, the defendants could be on the hook for up to $40 billion in damages. And this trial is set to begin early in 2024. So all eyes will be on this one. Now would be a good time to mention that Anywhere and RE/MAX actually settled both Sitzer Burnett and Merle cases prior to Sitzer Burnett going to trial, and they settled to the tune of $83.5 million and $55 million respectively. And we'll also get into what other pieces were part of that settlement, which was actually approved by the courts just recently on November 20th. So aside from the monetary agreement in the settlement of Anywhere and RE/MAX in both of these cases, they also agreed to make some changes to their current practices. And this could be a little bit of a telltale sign to some of the things that we can expect going forward. But before we get to the changes that I just mentioned, let's get back to the suits and what's really the basis here. At the heart of the suits is NAR's compensation rule or participation rule, which they say is a blanket rule that is mandatory and requires brokers to offer a non-negotiable blanket commission in order to list the property on the MLS. Now, most MLSs are controlled by local NAR associations and make a requirement that those that list on the MLS must be members of NAR and follow NAR rules, the NAR handbook, and the compensation or participation rule in which buy-side commission is offered as part of the listing. The plaintiffs allege that this conspiracy has saddled home sellers with a cost or a burden that otherwise in an open market would have been borne by the buyers themselves rather than the seller paying for the buy-side agent fees. They also allege that buy-side agents steer their clients away from properties that offer lower compensation, and therefore sellers are forced into offering higher commissions on a blanket non-negotiable structure. As mentioned earlier, Sitzer Burnett and Merle are just two of the cases that are facing the industry right now. And another one is NoSelect versus MLS PIN. And this case actually settled for $3 million back in September. But in an interesting twist, the DOJ came out and basically asked the court to put a hold on it while they looked into this. Now, this is something that we really want to keep an eye on, because the DOJ actually settled with NAR over the compensation rule back in 2020, but has since tried to reopen it. Earlier in the year, that was rejected. But in the meantime, they're definitely keeping a close eye on these cases. And we expect that this is not the last that we're going to hear from the DOJ on the issue. As soon as the verdict was read in Sitzer Burnett, before the ink dried, it feels like, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs, Michael Ketchmark, immediately filed another lawsuit, Gibson versus NAR. And in this suit, it pits again home sellers against National Association of Realtors and 6 other brokers that were not listed in the other lawsuits. And this one is a national lawsuit, and the damages could reach up to $200 billion. Now, again, these are just a few of the lawsuits, with what seems like new suits popping up every day, including now some suits pitting home buyers versus the industry. But with all of this popping up and the actual verdict against NAR and the brokers from Sitzer Burnett, what will this mean for the industry, and what will this mean for you as a potential home buyer or home seller? In order to understand what this verdict means and what we can expect going forward, let's take a look at the settlements from Anywhere and RE/MAX and what they agreed, what changes they agreed to make, as well as what other developments have happened in the meantime in the industry. On September 1st, Anywhere shocked the industry by announcing that they had agreed to a settlement to the tune of $83.5 million. Then shortly thereafter, on September 15th, RE/MAX came out and they too agreed to the tune of $55 million. This was both to settle the Sitzer and the Merle cases. And what we've learned since then is what changes they agreed to make. And some of these are a little bit eye-opening. The agreed upon changes by both companies are fairly similar, so let's look at a few of the main points here. 1, they agreed to prohibit agents from claiming that buyer agent services are free. 2, they agreed to prohibit sorting listings by buyer agent commission through the use of technology or other tools. 3, they will advise affiliates and agents that there is no rule requiring offers of compensation. 4, they will no longer require agents to be members of NAR, follow the NAR Code of Ethics or Handbook. And 5, they will require their brokerages and agents to clearly advise clients that commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. 6, they will eliminate any minimum commission requirement. And 7, they will develop training materials that cover all of the practice changes. Also, prior to the Sitzer trial, two other pieces of news came out that had a definite impact on the industry. First was in early October, Redfin announced that they were leaving National Association of Realtors, and they were telling all of their agents that could to leave National Association of Realtors, and only those agents that were required to be part of NAR, to be part of the local END, could remain. Also on October 6th, in a surprising twist, National Association of Realtors came out and announced that they were now allowing $0 buy-side compensation for any listing on all 500 of their local listing services. Now, of course, attorneys for the plaintiffs jumped on this change by NAR, claiming this was a glaring admission of guilt. And based on what happened in that trial and the verdict that was read, maybe the jury agreed with them. So where does this all leave us, and what should we expect going forward? So one of the big questions is, what does the current verdict and ongoing litigation, where does that leave NAR? We know that NAR has claimed that they will continue to fight, and they are appealing the verdict in Sitzer Burnett. I personally don't think that they're going to win that appeal, and I'll go into that into my next video, but they claim that they did nothing wrong and that they're going to fight till the end, and we'll see if this will be the end for NAR. But the bigger question is, what's going to happen with agents? We know that both Anywhere and RE/MAX, as part of their settlements, are telling agents that they no longer have to be part of NAR. We also know that Redfin came out prior to the trial and separated from NAR and told their agents to leave NAR when they could. And are we going to see similar from other agents, from other brokerages, especially now that other brokerages are starting to be named in a number of the new lawsuits? So are we going to see agents start to flee in droves? Are agents, if they don't have to, are they going to pay $150 a year just to have that NAR logo or that realtor logo and the code of ethics by their name? That's one of the big questions. Some of them will have to stay because the local MLSs require being a member of NAR to list on their service. But I think we're going to see some separation in that as well. I think more ML services will separate themselves when they can from NAR, but that's going to be a case by case. I mean, remember, there's literally hundreds of local services out there. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. The other question too is, will NAR be able to, will they have the funds to continue this litigation, and or is the DA gonna step in? I mean, they're clearly watching what's going on and they want to get changes from NAR and how the system currently works. So don't be surprised if they jump back in as well. Okay, so aside from NAR, what does all this mean for you, the home buyer or home seller? What kind of changes are we going to see, and how will this impact you? Well, first, obviously, this is going to take some time. We're probably not going to see too many drastic changes immediately, but we're going to see definite changes over time. Now, the first scenario is simply that things will stay fairly similar, but we're going to see a lot more disclosure out there. That's disclosure to sellers, making sure that they understand that they are paying for the buy side as it now stands. And in that, it's also making sure that as part of those disclosures, that sellers are fully aware that the commission itself is fully negotiable and there is no set price, set commission. It doesn't have to be 5 or 6%. Will this mean because of that we'll see some depreciation, so to speak, in those commissions and see that come down, maybe, 4 to 5% total instead of 5 to 6? Time will tell on that. But overall, there's a lot of agents out there that think that it's kind of much ado about nothing, and it's really going to be just more disclosure and making the sellers fully aware about the commissions being negotiable and that they are paying the buy-side agent, but it's not going to have a major impact. Now, scenario 2 is going to be that you no longer will be allowed to pay the buy-side agent from the listing agent. The listing agent no longer is allowed. So it's basically going to decouple that commission, and there's going to be a separation, whereas either the seller themselves will have to pay the buy-side agent, which actually has come into play in New York. They've made that change already in New York City through the real estate board. But also it could mean just more of negotiating between the buyer's agent and the actual buyer, in which case the buyer will be paying for their buy-side agent commissions. We'll get back into that one in a moment because there's a lot of people that think that that's the direction we're going to go, and there could be seen as pluses and minuses to that, so we'll get back to that. Another scenario being floated around a lot, especially from real estate agents, is the idea that the commission can be rolled into the financing, can be paid for out of the loan. There are some scenarios where different programs go to higher cumulative loan to value, things like that. So that may be a possibility, but I don't necessarily think that that's going to be the most beneficial and first choice. And there's a host of problems when you run into trying to tack it into the financing portion again regarding LTV, loan to value, and debt to income, all those sort of things, as well as the appraisal itself. So I personally don't think that that's going to be as viable. If it really comes down to it, there may be some solutions there, but that's not one that I'm betting on. Now, another, let's say fourth, fifth type of scenario would be some sort of hybrid type scenario. You're going to see what I think, if it comes down to it, a lot of discount type brokerages coming out there. We've seen it on the sales side. So why not on the buyer side? We've heard things floating around anywhere from paying your agent hourly to take you out on showings, things like that. You also hear a lot about maybe a kind of an attorney type setup where it's a retainer that is paid and they will negotiate and do the actual contract for you, but they're not necessarily going to be going out and taking you to all the listings. And also, some flat fee service type of deals that, we'll do it for XYZ, $1,000 to write the contract, etc. So I think that we're going to see some of that pop up regardless, just because of what everything's going on. Whether that's going to be the solution, who knows? Probably not, but that is another scenario. Now, getting back to paying the buyer's agent directly as the buyer. We probably will see some of this, but who does that benefit? That benefits the rich. It benefits people that have money. Who it hurts is the first-time home buyer, people that are already struggling to come up with a down payment and thus trying to come up with another 2 to 3% to pay for their agent services. I don't see that as being as viable. Again, it will work for some of the higher priced homes, for some of the borrowers that can afford it. But overall, if you're looking for first-time home buyers, things like that, it's going to hinder them and it's probably not real viable. A lot of those people, I predict, are going to be doing their shopping online. As far as using the internet, which we know about 96% of people already initially shop for their homes on the internet, and that was kind of part of the argument for the plaintiffs. And then they'll probably be going to the listing agent direct. So that to me is, another situation that I expect we're going to see come out of all this. And speaking of online, don't be surprised to see the Zillows and the Redfins of the world take advantage of what's going on here. I'm sure that that's probably a big part of Redfin's separation, not only on a litigation side to separate themselves, even though they were named in one of the more recent suits, but also that they're probably trying to position themselves to go after kind of that flat fee discount side, as we discussed. So as we know, all of this is going to take some time to unfold, but I don't see things staying status quo. Now, part of it could be market dynamics or economics of what's going on in a particular market. For instance, right now, with homes maybe being on the market a little bit longer, sellers offering some concessions in a lot of areas. In that case, maybe the sellers are going to be willing to pay that commission, the current 5 to 6%, because they want to get rid of their home. But if we get back to a market like 2021 where we have 20, 30 bids on each property and people are stumbling over themselves to bid 20, 30,000 over list price, do you really think that sellers are just going to sit back and pay the status quo? That's the situation where I see sellers are going to say, wait a minute, I'm not paying that buyer's agent 3% when basically I could put a sign in my front yard and have all these people put in offers. So that's where we're going to see, in my opinion, some of this wash out. But in the meantime, as everything does, when it goes through the court system, I mean, this can take months or it can take years. So based on the current settlements, I do expect to see some changes, and we're already seeing little bits right now. But overall, I don't think we're going to see any major changes overnight. Keep in mind, though, that right now the home sellers out there are becoming more and more aware because this news has become more mainstream. It had been really only in the real estate circles for the last couple of years, but now after this verdict, it's been all over the news. So we'll see what kind of pushback comes out there. And in the meantime, we'll keep you up on what's going on. Stay tuned.